The snow blanketed the streets of a small suburban town in Massachusetts as Christmas lights flickered against the encroaching dusk. The festive air was tangible, holiday tunes hummed from speakers, and families bustled in and out of the local supermarket, pushing carts loaded with turkeys, cranberries, and brightly wrapped gifts. Among them was Michael Andrews, a 36-year-old black man with a warm smile and a deep faith in God. His Christmas list was modest but meaningful: ingredients for his mother's famous sweet potato pie, a toy train set for his young nephew, and a warm scarf for his pastor. Michael, dressed in a plain navy jacket and a knitted hat, wheeled his cart through the aisles, humming softly to himself. He moved with quiet purpose, his faith reminding him that joy could be found even in simplicity. Despite his calm demeanor, Michael was acutely aware of the eyes that followed him, an all-too-familiar sensation for a black man navigating spaces in predominantly white neighborhoods. As Michael reached for a carton of eggnog, he noticed a security guard lingering at the end of the aisle, pretending to organize shelves. The man's gaze was sharp, assessing. Michael sighed inwardly, praying for patience. He'd been here before: the accusatory glances, the unspoken assumptions. He reminded himself of his mother's advice: walk with grace, no matter the trials. God sees it all. However, grace proved difficult when the situation escalated. As Michael reached the checkout line, 3 store employees approached him, their faces tight with suspicion. One of them, a tall man with a badge reading "Manager," spoke curtly. "Sir, we've had a report of suspicious activity. Please step aside." Michael froze, his heart pounding. Suspicious activity? "I'm just doing my Christmas shopping." The manager gestured to the security guard, who stepped closer. "We'll need to check your bags." Confused and frustrated, Michael held up his receipt. "Everything here is paid for." "Look, I can prove it." But his words fell on deaf ears. Before he could protest further, the situation spiraled. Michael was handcuffed, his cart overturned, and the stares of the shoppers burned into him like a spotlight. As Michael was led out of the store into the freezing night, a question echoed in his mind: why is this still happening? The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Michael's wrists as he was marched out of the supermarket. A few bystanders gasped in shock, while others muttered among themselves. Some pulled out their phones, recording the humiliating scene, but no one stepped forward to help. Snowflakes began to fall lightly, a stark contrast to the tension filling the air. Michael's mind raced as he tried to process what had just happened. He had done nothing wrong, he was certain of it. His receipt was in his pocket, and every item in his cart was accounted for. Yet here he was, treated as though he were a criminal. "Officer," Michael said, addressing the local police officer who had arrived moments before to escort him out, "there's been a mistake. I have my receipt right here." The officer, a younger man with a hardened expression, glanced at Michael but didn't say a word. The supermarket manager followed closely behind, speaking in a low, urgent voice. "We saw him acting suspiciously in the aisles. He was lingering too long in the electronics section," the manager said. "I think he was trying to slip something into his jacket." Michael turned his head sharply, incredulous. "Electronics section? I didn't even..." He stopped himself, realizing it was futile to argue. He took a deep breath and silently prayed for strength. The officer stopped next to the patrol car, forcing Michael to face the growing crowd. He could see a mix of emotions in the onlookers. Some were visibly uncomfortable, others appeared judgmental, and a few seemed openly hostile. "Please," Michael said calmly, struggling to keep his voice steady, "check the receipt, check the bags. You'll see I'm telling the truth." For a moment, the officer hesitated. He glanced at the store employees, who looked equally uncertain. One of them, a woman with a clipboard, stepped forward. "Maybe we should..." "No," the manager cut her off. "We caught him. The cameras will back us up." Michael's patience cracked. "Cameras? Good. Let's look at them. Let's see what they show." The officer sighed, his breath clouding in the icy air. "Let's take him to the station first. We'll sort it out there." As Michael was placed into the back of the patrol car, he felt a mixture of anger, humiliation, and sadness. "Why does my skin color make me guilty in their eyes?" he thought bitterly. His faith was his anchor, but even that felt tenuous now. He whispered a quiet prayer, hoping for clarity. Inside the station, Michael sat in an interrogation room under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. His jacket had been removed, and he could feel the chill of the room seeping into his bones. Across from him sat a detective, an older man with graying hair and a tired expression. "Mr. Andrews," the detective began, flipping through a file, "you've been accused of attempting to steal merchandise from the supermarket. Do you have anything to say?" Michael leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "I have plenty to say. First, I didn't steal anything. Second, I have my receipt. And third, I'd like to see the surveillance footage they're talking about." The detective studied Michael for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. Let's take a look." An hour later, the footage was reviewed. It clearly showed Michael pushing his cart through the aisles, picking up items, and heading to the checkout line. There was no evidence of theft, no lingering in the electronics section, no slipping items into his jacket, nothing suspicious at all. The detective rubbed his temples, clearly irritated. "Looks like this was a mistake," he admitted reluctantly. Michael's anger flared. "A mistake? Do you have any idea what you've put me through? My name, my dignity dragged through the mud, all because of a mistake?" The detective avoided Michael's gaze. "You're free to go." Outside the station, Michael stood in the parking lot, the weight of the ordeal settling heavily on his shoulders. His car was parked nearby, covered in a thin layer of snow. He took out his phone to call his mother, but before he could dial, he noticed a figure approaching him. It was the woman from the supermarket, the one who had hesitated to accuse him. She looked nervous, her hand stuffed into her coat pocket. I'm so sorry," she stammered. "I should have spoken up. I knew this wasn't right." Michael studied her, his expression unreadable. "Why didn't you?" She hesitated. "Because I was scared. The manager, he runs that store like a tyrant. But that's no excuse. What happened to you was wrong." Michael let out a slow breath. "Thank you for saying that. But what are you going to do about it now?" Her eyes widened slightly. "What do you mean? You want to make it right? Then stand up for what's right. If you're afraid, lean on God. But don't just say sorry and walk away." She nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. I'll speak to HR about what happened." Michael watched her walk away, her head bowed. As he climbed into his car, he closed his eyes and whispered, "Lord, give me the strength to fight this injustice. Not just for me, but for anyone who's been in my shoes." Michael sat in his car, staring blankly at the steering wheel. Snow continued to fall in delicate, hushed flurries, covering the world around him in a deceptive tranquility. He couldn't drive home, not yet. His heart was too heavy, his mind racing with questions that demanded answers. What had happened to him tonight wasn't just an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern he'd faced his entire life. Reaching into his glove compartment, Michael pulled out his Bible. It was old and worn, the edges of its leather cover fraying, but it had been his constant companion since he was a boy. Opening to the book of Psalms, he found a familiar passage and began to read aloud. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" The words settled over him like a warm blanket, reminding him that even in his darkest moments, he was not alone. He closed his eyes and prayed, asking God for guidance. When he opened them, his resolve was clear. He wasn't going to let this injustice fade into the background. He would fight it not out of vengeance, but out of a sense of duty to his faith and his community. The next morning, Michael's phone buzzed with a flood of notifications. Videos of his arrest had gone viral overnight. Comments poured in from all corners of social media, some sympathetic, others filled with the same prejudices he had faced in the supermarket. Why was he even in that store? Doesn't he know they don't want people like him there? One comment read. Another, from a fellow believer, struck a different tone. "Brother, stand strong. The Lord fights for you." Let this moment shine a light on the truth. Michael's sister, Erica, called him shortly after. "Mike, have you seen this? Your arrest is all over the news." "I've seen it," Michael replied, his voice weary. "I didn't ask for any of this attention, Erica. I just wanted to buy groceries. But maybe this is bigger than you, she said. Maybe God is using this to shine a light on something that needs to change. Her words stayed with him as he drove to the local office of the Civil Rights Alliance, a nonprofit organization that had been fighting racial injustice for decades. The receptionist greeted him warmly, and within minutes, he was sitting across from Angela Martinez, a seasoned lawyer known for her unyielding commitment to justice. Mr. Andrews, I saw the video, Angela began, her voice steady and professional. What happened to you is unacceptable, and I'd like to help you take legal action, not just against the supermarket, but also against the police department for wrongful arrest. Michael hesitated. I don't want revenge, he said firmly. I just want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else. Angela nodded. I understand, but sometimes the only way to create change is to hold people accountable. If you're willing, we can file a lawsuit and demand a formal apology, along with policy changes at the store and the police department. After a moment of contemplation, Michael agreed. He knew this was a step of faith, but he also believed it was necessary. In the days that followed, the case gained traction. News outlets picked up the story, and Michael found himself thrust into the spotlight. Interviews, community rallies, and church meetings filled his days. While the support was overwhelming, so was the backlash. Some accused him of playing the race card, while others claimed he was trying to profit off the incident. One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Michael returned home to find his pastor waiting on his porch. Pastor Williams was an older man with a kind face and a wisdom that seemed to emanate from his very presence. Michael, the pastor said, handing him a cup of tea, how are you holding up? Michael sighed. I'm trying to stay strong, but it's hard. The world feels so broken, Pastor. Sometimes I wonder if anything I do will really make a difference. The pastor leaned forward, his eyes gentle but firm. Son, faith isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about trusting that God is with you in the process. Remember what Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You're doing the right thing, and that's never easy. Michael nodded, his heart heavy but comforted by the pastor's words. Thank you. I needed to hear that. A week later, a breakthrough came. The woman from the supermarket, the same one who had approached Michael in the parking lot, reached out to Angela. Her name was Emily, and she had decided to testify against her employer, revealing a pattern of discriminatory practices within the store. They've been profiling black customers for years, Emily confessed during a deposition. The manager even told us to keep a closer eye on them, especially during the holidays. But I can't stay silent anymore. Her testimony was a turning point. Combined with the surveillance footage and the growing public outcry, it painted a damning picture of the supermarket's practices. The store's corporate office issued a statement promising an internal investigation, but Michael wasn't satisfied with words. He wanted action. As the first signs of resolution began to appear, Michael found himself reflecting on his journey. This wasn't the Christmas he had envisioned, but it was one that tested his faith and deepened his resolve. Sitting in church on Christmas Eve, surrounded by his family and community, he realized that the greatest gift he could give wasn't a wrapped box, but a legacy of courage and hope. It was 2 days before Christmas when Michael received an unexpected call from Angela. Her voice carried an urgency that sent a chill down his spine. Michael, she said, we just received new information that changes everything. Can you come to my office immediately? Michael's pulse quickened. He bundled up in his coat and scarf, bracing against the bitter December wind as he drove to Angela's downtown office. The streets were bustling with last-minute shoppers, their cheerful energy a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in his own life. When Michael arrived, Angela ushered him into her office, where a man he didn't recognize was waiting. The man was tall and weary, with a nervous energy that made him fidget with the edge of his jacket. Angela introduced him as Darren, a former employee of the supermarket. I'm here because I saw what happened to you, Darren began, his voice shaky. And I couldn't stay silent anymore. Michael leaned forward, studying Darren carefully. What do you mean? Darren hesitated before speaking, as if weighing the consequences of his words. The manager who accused you. He's been doing this for years. Profiling black customers, setting them up to make it look like they're stealing. I used to work in loss prevention at that store, and he pressured me to target specific people. When I refused, he forced me out. Michael's jaw tightened. Why would he do that? Angela interjected. It's a tactic some stores use to claim higher theft losses. They use it as justification to file inflated insurance claims or to request increased security budgets. In this case, it seems to be a mix of systemic racism and greed. Darren nodded. I didn't have proof before, but now I do. After I left, I kept some of the emails he sent me, emails where he explicitly instructed us to watch black customers more closely. I also have old incident reports where he exaggerated theft allegations. Angela placed a hand on Darren's shoulder. This is the kind of evidence we need to expose not just the manager, but the larger system that allowed this to happen. If you're willing to testify, it could strengthen our case significantly. Michael felt a surge of conflicting emotions, anger at the injustice, relief that the truth was finally coming to light, and a renewed determination to see this through. Thank you for coming forward, he said to Darren. It takes courage to do what you're doing. That evening, Michael sat in his small living room, surrounded by legal documents and notes from Angela. His sister, Erica, arrived with a pot of chicken soup, insisting he take a break. You're carrying too much on your shoulders, Mike, she said, setting bowls on the coffee table. This isn't just about you anymore, it's about everyone who's ever been treated like this. Michael sighed, staring at the steam rising from his bowl. I know. That's why I can't stop now. But it's exhausting, Erica. The hate, the doubts, even the support, it's overwhelming. She placed a hand on his arm. Then lean on us. Lean on God. You don't have to carry this alone. Her words reminded Michael of something his late father used to say. God gives us the strength to fight, but he also gives us people to stand beside us. As they ate in silence, Michael felt a sense of calm washing over him. He wasn't alone in this fight. The next day, Angela filed a motion to subpoena the supermarket's corporate office, demanding records of internal communications and employee complaints. This action sent shockwaves through the company, and within hours, they released a public statement acknowledging that their policies would be reviewed. Still, Michael and Angela knew that this was just a preemptive move to deflect blame. Meanwhile, the police department issued a lukewarm apology for the wrongful arrest, but Michael wasn't satisfied. He wanted more than words, he wanted reform. Angela, ever the strategist, began coordinating with local advocacy groups to push for mandatory bias training for law enforcement and retail staff. As the momentum grew, so did the scrutiny. News outlets dug deeper into the supermarket's practices, uncovering a troubling history of racial profiling. Former employees and customers came forward with their own stories, painting a picture of systemic discrimination that went far beyond Michael's incident. The real twist came when Angela received a tip from an anonymous source inside the supermarket's corporate office. The source provided documents revealing that the company's upper management had been aware of the discriminatory practices for years and had actively worked to suppress complaints to protect their brand. Angela called Michael immediately. This is it, she said, her voice tinged with both excitement and gravity. This isn't just about one bad manager anymore. This goes all the way to the top. Michael felt a mixture of vindication and disbelief. You mean they knew? They let this happen? They didn't just let it happen, Angela replied. They fostered a culture where it could thrive. As Christmas Eve approached, Michael found himself reflecting on the journey he had been thrust into. This wasn't the holiday season he had planned, but in many ways, it had brought him closer to his faith. He saw God's hand at work in Darren's courage, in Emily's testimony, and even in the unexpected twists that had brought the truth to light. Sitting in the pews of his church that evening, surrounded by candlelight and the soft hum of carols, Michael felt a deep sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for justice, he was fighting for the kind of world that his nephew, his church family, and his community deserved. As the choir began to sing, O Holy Night, Michael closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, let this fight bring change. Not just for me, but for everyone. The day after Christmas, Michael's story reached a boiling point. National media picked it up, and public opinion split sharply. Many rallied behind him, hailing his courage in standing up to systemic racism. Others dismissed him as an opportunist, accusing him of seeking fame and financial gain. The tension only deepened when a high-profile spokesperson for the supermarket chain appeared on a televised interview. "We regret the unfortunate incident involving Mr. Andrews," the spokesperson said, their tone measured but distant. "While we strive to provide a safe and welcoming environment for all customers, we believe this situation was a misunderstanding. We are cooperating fully with local authorities to ensure a fair resolution." Michael, watching the broadcast with Erica, felt his stomach twist. The word misunderstanding rang hollow. It reduced the pain, humiliation, and injustice he had endured to a trivial inconvenience. Erica shook her head in frustration. "They're trying to control the narrative," she said, pacing the room. "Acting like it's no big deal so people will forget about it by New Year's." Michael rubbed his temples, the weight of the fight pressing down on him. "That's what they always do, isn't it? Minimize, deflect, and move on. But this time, they won't get away with it," Erica said, her voice resolute. "You've got too many people on your side now." Angela, however, was less optimistic. When Michael met with her later that afternoon, her usually confident demeanor was tinged with caution. "Michael," she said, sliding a thick folder across her desk, "the supermarket chain's legal team has filed a counterclaim." Michael frowned, opening the folder. Inside was a list of allegations accusing him of defamation and intentionally damaging the company's reputation. "They're claiming that the viral video and your public statements have caused a significant drop in their holiday sales," Angela explained. "They're demanding a retraction and financial compensation." Michael's pulse quickened. "Are you serious? They were the ones who humiliated me, and now they're playing the victim?" Angela nodded. "It's a scare tactic. They know they're in the wrong, but they're hoping to intimidate you into backing down. This is common in cases like this." Michael clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath the surface. "So what do? We fight back," Angela said firmly. "But it's going to get uglier. They'll dig into your past, twist your words, and try to discredit you in any way they can." Michael leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He had anticipated challenges, but this felt like an escalation designed to break him. He thought about the countless others who had faced similar battles and wondered how many of them had been silenced by fear or exhaustion. The pressure began to mount as Michael's personal life became a target. Reporters camped outside his home, snapping photos and shouting questions whenever he stepped outside. Social media trolls combed through his history, looking for any misstep they could exploit. Even at his church, a place that had always been a sanctuary, whispers of concern began to surface. During a Sunday service, Pastor Williams pulled Michael aside after the congregation had filed out. The older man's expression was a mix of compassion and worry. "Michael," he began, "you know we're all behind you. But this fight is taking a toll not just on you, but on everyone around you." Michael nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I know, Pastor, but I can't stop now. Not when so many people are counting on me." Pastor Williams placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. "Remember, son, God's battles aren't fought alone. Lean on your community, and don't forget to take care of your spirit. Even the strongest warriors need rest." That evening, Michael attended a community meeting organized by the Civil Rights Alliance. The room was packed with supporters, many of whom shared their own stories of discrimination. A young woman stood up, her voice trembling as she recounted being followed by store employees while shopping for her son's birthday gift. An older man described being accused of using a counterfeit bill at a local diner, even after proving it was legitimate. As the stories unfolded, Michael felt both a deep sadness and a renewed sense of purpose. His experience was not an isolated incident. It was part of a larger, systemic problem that needed to be addressed. When it was Michael's turn to speak, he stood and faced the crowd. "What happened to me is something no one should have to go through," he began. "But I've realized this fight isn't just about me. It's about all of us, about ensuring that our children, our neighbors, and our community can live with dignity and respect." The room erupted into applause, and for the first time in days, Michael felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone in this fight. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, the supermarket chain's executives were scrambling. Darren's testimony and the leaked internal documents had created a public relations nightmare. The board of directors debated whether to settle the lawsuit or double down on their defense. Some argued that admitting fault would set a dangerous precedent, while others warned that continuing the fight could irreparably damage their brand. Unbeknownst to Michael, the company's legal team had launched an aggressive campaign to suppress further leaks. Employees who spoke out were threatened with termination, and the anonymous whistleblower who had contacted Angela was being targeted for retaliation. As the tension built on both sides, Michael found solace in his faith. Late at night, when the weight of the day threatened to overwhelm him, he turned to prayer. One evening, as he knelt beside his bed, he asked God for guidance. "Lord, I don't know where this path will lead," he whispered, "but I trust you. Use me as your instrument, and let this fight bring light to the darkness." The weeks following Christmas brought a mix of progress and unexpected complications. Michael's case was gaining national attention, but the battle was far from over. The supermarket chain, under increasing pressure, launched a public relations campaign to restore its image. Ads began to appear on television and online, showcasing diversity and inclusion in the workplace, accompanied by a slogan, "Everyone belongs here." Michael scoffed when he saw one of the ads during a news broadcast. "They're trying to rebrand themselves while sweeping the truth under the rug," he said to Erica, who was seated beside him on the couch. "They think they can buy their way out of accountability," Erica replied, shaking her head. "But we're not letting them off the hook." Meanwhile, Angela had uncovered another layer to the case: the police department's involvement. Through a Freedom of Information Act request, she obtained emails revealing that the supermarket manager had a long-standing relationship with a senior officer in the local precinct. The emails suggested a pattern of collaboration, where the manager would report suspicious activity and the officer would ensure swift arrests, often without substantial evidence. Angela showed the documents to Michael during a meeting at her office. "This isn't just about racial profiling in the store," she explained. "It's about systemic bias in law enforcement. The police were complicit in targeting people of color." Michael stared at the papers, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "So, they weren't just profiling me, they were working together to criminalize people like me," Angela nodded. "If we can prove this in court, it could lead to significant policy changes. But it also makes the case more dangerous. The police union is already pushing back hard, claiming the emails are being taken out of context." Michael felt the weight of the revelation, but he knew backing down wasn't an option. "We expose them all," he said firmly, "no matter how hard they push." At the same time, Michael's personal life became increasingly strained. His sister, Erica, had been a pillar of support, but even she was beginning to feel the toll. One evening, as they sat at the kitchen table sorting through documents, she put her pen down and looked at him with weary eyes. "Michael," she said softly, "you know I'm with you, but this is hard. The media, the threats our family is in the crosshairs now." Michael reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "I know, Erica, and I'm sorry. I never wanted to drag you into this." She shook her head. "Don't apologize. I just need you to promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Promise me that, when this is over, when you've done everything you can, you'll find peace." "You deserve that." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "I promise." As the legal battle intensified, so did the public scrutiny. A new subplot emerged when a local reporter, Daniel Cruz, began investigating Michael's background. Cruz, known for his hard-hitting journalism, was initially skeptical of Michael's claims. However, as he dug deeper, he uncovered troubling patterns in the supermarket chain's history and the local police department's arrest record. Daniel reached out to Michael for an interview, promising to present an unbiased perspective. After much deliberation, Michael agreed, hoping that the truth would shine through. The interview aired on a primetime news segment, with Michael speaking candidly about his faith, his experiences with racism, and his determination to fight for justice. Daniel, to his credit, also included testimonies from other victims and exposed damning statistics about racial disparities in arrests tied to the supermarket. The segment went viral, garnering widespread attention and sparking national conversations about systemic racism. However, it also brought new challenges. Threatening messages flooded Michael's inbox, and one evening, his car windows were smashed by unknown vandals. Amid the chaos, Michael found unexpected allies. Churches across the country began to rally behind him, organizing prayer vigils and raising funds to support the legal case. One pastor, Reverend Clara Johnson from a neighboring town, invited Michael to speak at her congregation. "We believe God is using you as a vessel for change," Reverend Clara said when Michael arrived at the church. "And we're here to support you every step of the way." Michael felt a surge of gratitude as he stood before the congregation. Sharing his story with them reminded him of the strength that came from collective faith. The congregation's prayers and encouragement rekindled his resolve, and for the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of hope. Angela, meanwhile, had been working tirelessly to build the case. With the help of Darren's testimony and the leaked documents, she prepared a comprehensive argument that exposed the supermarket chain's discriminatory practices and the police department's complicity. But as the trial date approached, the company's lawyers intensified their efforts to discredit Michael. One evening, Angela called Michael with an update. "They've hired a forensic investigator to review the video footage from the supermarket," she said. "They're trying to find anything to cast doubt on your actions that night." Michael sighed, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Let them look. They won't find anything because I didn't do anything wrong." "That's true," Angela agreed. "But we need to be prepared for them to twist the narrative. They're not just fighting to win, they're fighting to destroy your credibility." As the case continued to unfold, Michael leaned more heavily on his faith. Every night, he knelt by his bed and prayed for strength, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been wrongfully accused or profiled. He knew this fight wasn't just about him, it was about dismantling a system that thrived on injustice. One night, as he closed his prayer, a phrase from his late father echoed in his mind. "The darkest hour is just before dawn." Michael rose to his feet, his resolve unshaken. The fight was far from over, but he was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The trial date loomed closer, casting a shadow over Michael's life. The closer they got to the courtroom, the more intense the scrutiny became. The supermarket's legal team escalated their tactics, and the pressure on Michael and those around him grew unbearable at times. Each day brought new challenges, testing not only his resilience, but also his faith. One afternoon, Michael sat in Angela's office reviewing the latest developments. Darren, the former employee turned whistleblower, was scheduled to testify. However, Angela looked uneasy as she updated Michael. "Darren is wavering," she admitted. "The supermarket's lawyers have been pressuring him. They've hinted that his testimony could cost him future job opportunities." Michael leaned back in his chair, his frustration evident. "They're trying to silence him, just like they tried to silence everyone else who spoke out. Can we protect him?" Angela nodded. "We'll do everything we can, but he's scared. You should talk to him, Michael. Maybe hearing from you will give him the courage to keep going." That evening, Michael met Darren at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Darren looked visibly anxious, his hands trembling slightly as he sipped his coffee. "They're coming after me, Michael," Darren said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this." Michael placed a reassuring hand on Darren's shoulder. "I know it's hard," he said gently, "but you're not alone in this. You've already shown so much courage by coming forward. What they're doing isn't just wrong, it's evil. And standing up to it matters." Darren hesitated, then looked Michael in the eye. "You really think we can win?" Michael's voice was firm. "I don't know if we'll win in court, but I know we'll win where it counts. You stepping up already means something. It's bigger than both of us." After a long silence, Darren nodded. "Okay, I'll testify." Back at home, Michael faced another emotional hurdle. His nephew, 8-year-old Isaiah, had seen clips of the news coverage online and was full of questions. "Uncle Mike," Isaiah said, tugging at Michael's sleeve. "Why are those people so mean to you? Did you do something bad?" Michael's heart ached at the innocence in Isaiah's eyes. He knelt down to his level, choosing his words carefully. "Nobody. I didn't do anything wrong. But sometimes people make bad choices because they don't understand or because they're scared." Isaiah frowned, processing the explanation. "Are you scared?" Michael smiled softly. "Sometimes. But I trust God to help me be brave. And I know He's with me, no matter what." Isaiah hugged him tightly, and in that moment, Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight wasn't just for himself or the people who had come forward. It was for the next generation, so they wouldn't have to grow up in a world where their worth was questioned because of the color of their skin. The pressure also took a toll on Michael's relationship with Erica. One evening, as they sorted through emails from supporters and advocacy groups, an argument erupted. "You're spreading yourself too thin, Michael," Erica said, her voice tinged with frustration. "You're trying to fight everyone at once, but you're only one person." Michael threw his hands up. "What am I supposed to do, Erica? Sit back and let them win? This isn't just about me. I can't let them keep doing this to people." "I'm not saying you should stop fighting," Erica countered, "but you need to take care of yourself too. You're no good to anyone if you burn out." The tension hung heavy between them until Michael finally sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry. You're right. I feel like if I don't push hard enough, it'll all fall apart." Erica softened, placing a hand on his arm. "It won't. You've got people standing with you. Lean on us." Meanwhile, Angela's team faced a new hurdle. The supermarket's legal team had uncovered a minor incident from Michael's past, a dispute with a former landlord over unpaid rent. Although the case had been resolved years ago, they were using it to paint Michael as unreliable and irresponsible. Angela was furious as she explained the situation to Michael. "It's a smear campaign, pure and simple," she said. "But we can counter it. The key is to stay calm and not let them bait you." Michael nodded, though he felt a flicker of doubt. "It's just exhausting, Angela. No matter how much proof we have, they'll keep trying to tear me down." Angela's expression softened. "That's their strategy to wear you out. But remember, Michael, the truth is on our side. And in the end, that's what will matter." In the midst of the chaos, Michael found solace at church. One Wednesday evening, Pastor Williams invited him to speak at the midweek service. Standing at the pulpit, Michael shared his journey, his struggles, and the faith that kept him going. "I faced moments where I wanted to give up," he admitted to the congregation. "But every time I felt like I couldn't take another step, God reminded me why I started this fight. This isn't just about one man or one incident. It's about changing a system that's broken. And with God's help, we will." The congregation erupted into applause, and Michael felt a wave of peace wash over him. Despite the mounting challenges, his faith remained unshaken. He wasn't just fighting for justice. He was fighting for hope, for truth, and for the promise of a better tomorrow. As the trial date approached, the tension escalated. Michael's legal team was working around the clock to solidify their case, but the supermarket's lawyers were relentless. New smear campaigns emerged, including leaked footage of Michael raising his voice at the supermarket manager during the initial confrontation. The video, conveniently edited to exclude the context of his arrest, was circulated widely online, accompanied by headlines like "Angry Shopper Confronts Store Employees." Michael watched the footage in Angela's office, his frustration boiling over. "This is ridiculous," he said, pacing the room. "They're twisting everything. How are we supposed to fight lies like this?" Angela leaned back in her chair, her expression calm but determined. "We expose the truth. That's all we can do. Remember, they're trying to provoke you. If you react emotionally, they'll use it against you." Michael sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. He wanted to stay composed, but the constant attacks felt like death by 1,000 cuts. Meanwhile, Darren's resolve was tested again. A private investigator hired by the supermarket's legal team began showing up at his workplace, questioning his co-workers and subtly implying that Darren was untrustworthy. Angela assured him they could file for a protective order if the harassment continued, but Darren was visibly shaken. They're not just trying to discredit me, Darren told Michael during a late-night phone call. They're trying to ruin my life. Michael felt a pang of guilt. I'm so sorry, Darren. I never wanted this to happen to you. It's not your fault, Darren replied. But this fight, it's bigger than either of us. I just hope we're doing the right thing. We are, Michael said firmly. And no matter what, I've got your back. Amid the mounting pressure, a mysterious email arrived in Angela's inbox. The sender used an untraceable address and signed off only as a friend. The email contained a link to an internal document from the supermarket's corporate office, one that hadn't been included in the original batch of leaked files. The document was a training manual for store managers, and one section stood out: high theft profiles. The section listed traits that employees were encouraged to monitor, including frequent visits without purchases, groups of young males, and, disturbingly, customers whose appearance suggests they are not local. Angela showed the document to Michael, her face grim. This is it, she said. It doesn't outright mention race, but the language is coded. Combined with Darren's testimony, it paints a clear picture of discriminatory practices. Michael nodded slowly, the weight of the discovery sinking in. It's not just one manager or one store, it's their entire system, Angela agreed. If we can verify the document's authenticity, it could be a game changer. But we need to be careful. The supermarket's lawyers will claim it's a forgery if we don't have solid proof. The next day, Angela's team began investigating the origin of the document. They reached out to the anonymous whistleblower who had leaked the initial files, hoping for confirmation. However, the whistleblower had gone silent, and efforts to contact them yielded no response. This development added another layer of intrigue to the case. Who was a friend, and why had they sent the manual at this critical juncture? Michael couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside the supermarket's corporate office was rooting for him, but from the shadows. Outside the courtroom, tensions spilled into the community. A group of activists organized a peaceful protest outside the supermarket, holding signs that read, "Stop Racial Profiling" and "Justice for Michael Andrews." The demonstration garnered significant media attention, further amplifying the pressure on the supermarket chain. However, not everyone in the community was supportive. A counter-protest formed across the street, with participants holding signs that read, "Stop the Victim Mentality" and "Boycott the Boycotters." The scene turned chaotic when a verbal altercation broke out between the two groups. Michael, who had been watching the protest from a distance, felt his heart sink as he saw police officers moving in to separate the crowd. "This is what they want," he said to Erica, who was standing beside him. "They want to divide us." Erica nodded solemnly. "But we won't let them. Your case is about truth, not hate. People will see that eventually." Back at home, Michael received a late-night call from Reverend Clara Johnson, who had become a close ally in his fight for justice. Her voice was calm but urgent. "Michael, I've been hearing whispers from some of my contacts in the corporate world," she said. "The supermarket's leadership is more worried than they're letting on. Apparently, there's an internal memo circulating, urging them to settle quietly before the trial starts." Michael sat up straight, his pulse quickening. "Settle? Do you think they're serious?" "They might be," Reverend Clara replied. "But be careful. A settlement might come with conditions that silence you. You have to decide what's more important, closure or continuing the fight." The next morning, Angela confirmed that the supermarket's legal team had reached out with a settlement offer. The terms included a significant financial payout and a public apology, but required Michael to sign a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent him from speaking publicly about the case. Michael sat in Angela's office, staring at the offer letter. "They want to pay me off so they can keep doing the same thing to other people," he said bitterly. Angela folded her hands on the desk. "It's your decision, Michael. A settlement could bring you financial security and end this ordeal. But if you reject it, the fight will get harder and messier." Michael closed his eyes, silently praying for guidance. He thought of his nephew, Darren, and the countless others who had shared their stories with him. This wasn't just about justice for himself, it was about challenging an entire system. When he opened his eyes, his voice was steady. "We keep fighting. Michael's decision to reject the settlement spread quickly, igniting both praise and criticism. Supporters applauded his integrity, while detractors accused him of being reckless or attention-seeking. The supermarket's legal team intensified their efforts to discredit him, and the pressure on Michael, Angela, and their allies grew heavier by the day. One morning, Michael awoke to an email from Darren, the whistleblower. The subject's line read, "We need to talk." Michael's heart raced as he opened the message. Darren wrote that he had been contacted by one of the supermarket's lawyers, who implied that further testimony could put Darren's family at risk. Michael immediately forwarded the email to Angela, who called him within minutes. "They're crossing the line," Angela said, her tone furious. "This is intimidation, plain and simple. We'll file for a restraining order to protect Darren and include this in our case." Michael agreed but felt a pang of guilt. He called Darren later that afternoon to reassure him. "You've already done so much," Michael said. "If you feel like stepping back, I'll understand." But Darren surprised him. "I'm scared, Michael, but this isn't just about me anymore. If I back down now, they win. I'm sticking with this." Michael felt a swell of gratitude. "Thank you, Darren. We're in this together." As Angela's team dug deeper into the supermarket's operations, they uncovered another bombshell, a pattern of targeting not just customers but employees of color. Several former staff members came forward, sharing stories of being passed over for promotions, receiving harsher punishments for minor infractions, and enduring racially insensitive remarks from management. One of the employees, a young woman named Lisa, told Angela that she had worked at the same store where Michael was arrested. Lisa recounted how the manager, the same man who had falsely accused Michael, had repeatedly referred to black customers as high risk and instructed employees to monitor them more closely. "I wanted to speak up," Lisa said during a meeting with Angela and Michael, "but I was afraid I'd lose my job. When I saw what happened to you, I knew I couldn't stay silent anymore." Michael thanked Lisa for her bravery. "Your voice makes a difference," he said. "Together, we're building a case they can't ignore." Meanwhile, the anonymous whistleblower, who had provided the training manual, resurfaced. This time, they sent a series of emails directly to Angela, revealing more internal documents. Among them was a damning report from a high-level meeting where executives discussed strategies to reduce liability issues related to customer profiling. The language in the report was chilling, filled with veiled references to targeting specific demographics without explicitly naming race. Angela called Michael late that evening. "This is it," she said. "This proves the company knew exactly what they were doing and tried to cover it up." Michael felt a surge of hope. "Do you think this will hold up in court?" "It's strong evidence," Angela replied, "but we'll need to verify its authenticity and prepare for them to claim it's fabricated." Still, it's a game changer. While the case gained momentum, Michael's personal life continued to face challenges. His nephew, Isaiah, who had been his biggest supporter, began experiencing bullying at school. One day, Isaiah came home in tears, clutching his backpack. "They said you're a liar," Isaiah sobbed. "They said you just want money." Michael's heart broke as he hugged the boy tightly. "Listen to me, Isaiah," he said softly. "What we're doing isn't easy, and not everyone will understand. But I promise you, standing up for what's right is always worth it." Isaiah sniffled and looked up at him. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Michael said firmly. "And I need you to remember something. You're stronger than any of those bullies. God made you strong." The moment deepened Michael's resolve. He wasn't just fighting for himself, he was fighting for his family, his community, and future generations. At the same time, tensions between Michael and Erica resurfaced. One evening, as they reviewed more documents from Angela, Erica voiced her growing concerns. "Michael, this is getting out of hand," she said, her voice trembling. "The threats, the stress, it's affecting all of us. I'm proud of you, but I'm scared too." Michael set down the papers and looked at her. "I know, Erica, and I'm scared too. But what choice do I have? If I back down now, nothing changes." Erica shook her head. "You're carrying so much on your shoulders. Let us help you more." Michael sighed, his exhaustion evident. "I don't know how to let go of any of it. It feels like if I do, The whole thing will fall apart. Erica placed a hand on his arm. Then let's pray about it. Together, the two bowed their heads, and for the first time in weeks, Michael felt a sense of peace. He realized that while the fight was his to lead, it wasn't his to carry alone. In the days that followed, Michael's church and community redoubled their support. Pastor Williams organized a prayer rally that drew hundreds of attendees, many of whom shared their own experiences with discrimination. The rally became a powerful display of unity, sending a clear message to the supermarket chain and the police department. The community was watching, and they would not be silenced. As Michael stood before the crowd, he felt the weight of their hope and determination. "This fight isn't just about me," he said, his voice steady and strong. "It's about all of us. And with God's help, we will see justice." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead was still uncertain, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. The trial was only a week away, and tensions were at an all-time high. Michael's case had become a national flashpoint, with both supporters and detractors waiting to see how it would unfold. While his community rallied around him, the supermarket chain and its legal team were doubling down on their defense. Every day seemed to bring a new challenge. Angela called Michael early one morning, her tone urgent. "We've got a problem," she said. The supermarket's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss the case, claiming insufficient evidence. They're arguing that Darren's testimony and the leaked documents aren't enough to prove systemic discrimination. Michael frowned, frustration rising in his chest. Can they do that? Just throw the case out? Angela sighed. It's a long shot, but they're trying to stall. If the judge grants the motion, it could delay the trial for months or even years. They're hoping to wear us down. Michael shook his head. No, we can't let that happen. I've already filed a counter motion, Angela reassured him, and I'll be arguing it in court tomorrow. But be prepared. They're going to throw everything they have at us. The next day, Michael sat in the courtroom, watching as Angela delivered a passionate argument against the supermarket's motion to dismiss. She presented the leaked documents, Darren's testimony, and the training manual as evidence of a clear pattern of racial profiling. "These aren't isolated incidents," Angela said, her voice steady and commanding. "They're part of a systemic problem that the defendant has not only ignored, but perpetuated." The supermarket's lead attorney, a sharp-tongued man named Richard Blake, countered with equal fervor. He dismissed Darren as an unreliable witness and argued that the leaked documents were unverifiable and irrelevant. When the judge finally ruled in Angela's favor, Michael felt a wave of relief wash over him. The case would proceed, but he knew the victory was just the beginning of a larger battle. As the trial approached, the supermarket's legal team escalated their smear campaign against Michael. An op-ed published in a major newspaper accused him of seeking fame and financial gain, while a pundit on a conservative news channel mocked him as another opportunist playing the victim card. Michael tried to ignore the noise, but it became harder when reporters began harassing his family. One evening, Erica called him in tears. "They showed up at my job, Michael," she said, "asking about you, about us." "It's too much." Michael's heart sank. "I'm so sorry, Erica. I'll talk to Angela. We can file a restraining order against them." Erica hesitated. "It's not just that. I'm scared, Michael. For you, for all of us." Michael's voice was firm. "We'll get through this. I promise." Meanwhile, Darren faced his own crisis. One night, his wife received an anonymous letter containing veiled threats against their children. The letter, printed on plain paper with no return address, sent chills down Darren's spine. Michael visited Darren the next day, finding him visibly shaken. "They're trying to scare me into silence," Darren said, holding the letter with trembling hands. "And it's working." Michael placed a hand on Darren's shoulder. "I can't tell you what to do," he said gently, "but I can tell you this. Standing up for what's right isn't easy. It's messy, and it's scary. But if we give in to fear, they win." Darren looked at him, his eyes filled with doubt. "I just don't know if I can keep putting my family through this." Michael nodded, understanding Darren's pain. "Whatever you decide, I'm grateful for what you've already done." "You've made a difference, Darren." Don't forget that, in the midst of these challenges, Michael found an unexpected ally in Daniel Cruz, the journalist who had initially approached him for an interview. Daniel had continued investigating the case and uncovered a bombshell. The supermarket chain had settled several racial discrimination lawsuits in the past, all of which had been buried under non-disclosure agreements. Daniel called Michael late one night, his voice electric with urgency. "Michael, this changes everything," he said. "This isn't the first time they've done this. If we can get one of those former plaintiffs to come forward, it could blow their defense wide open." Michael's heart raced. "Do you think anyone would be willing to break their NDA?" "I've reached out to a few," Daniel said. "One of them, a woman named Denise Brown, sounded interested, but she's scared. If you talk to her, she might feel more comfortable." Michael agreed and met Denise at a quiet cafe the next day. She was a middle-aged black woman with a soft but determined demeanor. She explained how the supermarket had wrongfully fired her years ago, accusing her of theft without evidence. They had settled out of court, but the NDA had silenced her ever since. "I've wanted to speak out for years," Denise admitted, "but I've been afraid. They have so much power." Michael nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I know how scary it is to stand up to them, but your voice could make a difference not just for this case, but for everyone they've hurt." Denise sat in silence for a long moment, then finally said, "I'll think about it." The closer the trial came, the more Michael leaned on his faith. Each night, he spent hours in prayer, asking God for strength and clarity. On the eve of the trial, he attended a special service at his church, where Pastor Williams delivered a sermon on perseverance. "When we walk through the fire," Pastor Williams said, his voice resonant, "God walks with us. He doesn't promise that the fire won't burn, but he promises that it won't consume us." Michael felt tears welling in his eyes as the congregation prayed over him. He didn't know what the trial would bring, but he knew he wasn't alone. Whatever the outcome, he would face it with courage and faith. The trial began on a crisp January morning, with the courtroom filled to capacity. Reporters lined the back walls, their cameras aimed at the central players, while Michael sat beside Angela, his nerves taut, but his resolve firm. Across the aisle sat Richard Blake, the supermarket's lead attorney, flanked by a team of sharp-dressed lawyers, and the store manager who had falsely accused Michael. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. Opening arguments began, with Angela painting a vivid picture of the systemic discrimination that had led to Michael's wrongful arrest. She outlined the evidence, the surveillance footage, Darren's testimony, the leaked training manual, and the troubling emails between the store and local police. "This case is about more than one man's experience," Angela said, her voice steady but powerful. "It's about a system designed to marginalize and dehumanize. It's about the courage to say enough is enough." Blake, in his rebuttal, leaned on a strategy of deflection and character attacks. He portrayed Michael as a disgruntled shopper seeking revenge, and argued that the leaked documents were unreliable and taken out of context. "This is a story of misunderstandings blown out of proportion," Blake said, addressing the jury. "The plaintiff wants you to believe he's a victim of some grand conspiracy, but the evidence will show otherwise." The trial unfolded over several tense days, with witnesses from both sides taking the stand. Darren's testimony was particularly gripping. He described in painstaking detail how the store manager had routinely instructed employees to target black customers and exaggerate theft claims. Blake tried to rattle Darren during cross-examination. "Mr. Jenkins," he said, pacing in front of the jury, "isn't it true that you were terminated from your position for poor performance?" Darren squared his shoulders, his voice unwavering. "No, sir. I was pushed out because I refused to follow discriminatory policies. And I'm here because it's the truth." Blake's lips tightened, but Darren's words struck a chord with the jury. Denise Brown, the former employee who had been wrongfully terminated years earlier, decided to break her NDA and testify. Her decision came after Michael and Angela reassured her that her bravery could lead to meaningful change. "I signed that NDA because I was scared," Denise said on the stand, "but staying silent hasn't brought me peace. I've seen this company destroy lives, and I can't let it continue Her testimony was a turning point, revealing a pattern of behavior that stretched back years and implicating higher-ups in the company. Blake retaliated with an aggressive strategy, calling the supermarket manager to the stand. The manager, a stern-faced man named Steve Whitman, denied any wrongdoing and insisted that Michael's arrest had been justified. "I called the police because Mr. Andrews was acting suspiciously," Whitman said. "I didn't make any assumptions based on race." Angela's cross-examination was surgical. She presented internal emails from Whitman to his staff, where he explicitly referred to black customers as high risk and instructed employees to monitor them closely. "Mr. Whitman," Angela said, her voice cutting through the tension, "are these your emails?" Whitman hesitated, his confidence faltering. Yes, but they're being taken out of context." "What context justifies profiling customers based on their race?" Angela pressed, her gaze unyielding. Whitman's silence spoke louder than any answer he could give. Outside the courtroom, the trial became a media spectacle. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs that read "Justice for Michael" and "Stop Racial Profiling." Counterprotesters, funded in part by the supermarket's PR campaign, accused Michael of exploiting the situation for personal gain. Michael did his best to tune out the noise, focusing on the trial and his nightly prayers. But the strain on his family was palpable. Erica had stopped attending the proceedings, her fear for their safety outweighing her desire to support him in person. One evening, Michael visited her house, hoping to mend the rift. "Erica," he said gently, "I know this has been hard on you, on all of us, but I need you to know that I'm doing this for us, for Isaiah, for everyone who's ever been treated like they don't belong." Erica's eyes filled with tears. "I know, Michael. I just want this to be over. I want us to be safe again." Michael hugged her tightly. "We will be. God's got us." As the trial entered its final days, Angela delivered a searing closing argument. She wove together the testimonies, the documents, and the surveillance footage into a narrative that left little doubt about the supermarket's culpability. "This case isn't just about what happened to Michael Andrews," she said, her voice steady but impassioned. "It's about holding those in power accountable for their actions. It's about standing up to a system that says some lives are worth less than others. And it's about justice for Michael, for Darren, for Denise, and for every person who has ever been wrongfully judged." Blake's closing argument was calculated but lacked the emotional resonance of Angela's. He leaned heavily on technicalities, urging the jury to focus on the specifics of Michael's case rather than the broader implications. As the jury left to deliberate, Michael felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The trial had been grueling, and now all he could do was wait. The deliberation stretched into the evening, each passing hour heightening the tension. Michael sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse, clutching his Bible and whispering a prayer. "Lord," he murmured, "I've done all I can. The rest is in your hands." When the bailiff finally announced that the jury had reached a verdict, Michael stood, his heart pounding. He exchanged a glance with Angela, who gave him a reassuring nod. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table, his palms damp with sweat. Angela remained calm beside him, her demeanor unshaken. Across the aisle, Richard Blake adjusted his tie, a flicker of nervousness betraying his usual confidence. "All rise," the bailiff called, and everyone stood as the judge entered the room. After a brief exchange of formalities, the jury foreperson stood to deliver the verdict. Michael's pulse quickened, each second stretching unbearably as the foreperson unfolded the paper. "In the matter of Andrews v. Whitman Supermarkets, Inc., we find in favor of the plaintiff." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a murmur of voices. Michael froze, his mind struggling to process the words. Beside him, Angela smiled, a rare break from her usual stoicism. The foreperson continued, "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $500,000 for emotional distress and punitive damages of $2.5 million. Michael's breath hitched, tears welling in his eyes. It wasn't just the money, it was the validation, the acknowledgement that what had happened to him was wrong, that the system had failed him, but justice had prevailed. He glanced back at Erica, who was seated in the gallery, her face a mixture of relief and pride. The defense team looked visibly shaken. Blake stood, his expression tight, and requested an opportunity to file a post-trial motion to appeal the decision. The judge granted it, but Michael knew this was a standard procedural move. The verdict was a decisive victory. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, holding signs of support and chanting Michael's name. Reporters swarmed the steps as Michael and Angela emerged, flanked by Darren, Denise, and other supporters. A journalist thrust a microphone toward Michael. "Mr. Andrews, how do you feel about the jury's decision?" Michael paused, his heart full of gratitude. "Today's verdict is about more than me," he said, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "It's about everyone who's ever been judged unfairly because of the color of their skin. It's about standing up to injustice and saying, 'No more.' I'm thankful to the jury, to my legal team, and to God for guiding me through this journey." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in months, he allowed himself to breathe fully, the weight on his shoulders finally lifting. The supermarket chain released a statement shortly after the verdict, promising to implement sweeping reforms, including mandatory bias training for employees and the overhaul of their loss prevention policies. While many viewed the statement as damage control, Michael saw it as a step in the right direction. "Change doesn't happen overnight," Angela told him later. "But this case has set a precedent. They'll think twice before targeting someone else." That evening, Michael returned to his church, where Pastor Williams had organized a small celebration. The sanctuary was filled with members of the congregation, their faces glowing with pride and joy. Isaiah ran up to Michael, hugging him tightly. "You did it, Uncle Mike," he said, his eyes wide with admiration. Michael knelt down, smiling at his nephew. "We did it," he said, "all of us." During the service, Pastor Williams delivered a message of perseverance and faith. "The Lord doesn't promise us a life without trials," he said, "but he promises to walk with us through the fire." Michael's journey reminds us that with faith, courage, and a community that stands together, we can overcome even the greatest challenges. Michael sat in the front pew, his heart full as the choir sang Amazing Grace. He felt the presence of his late father in that moment, the echoes of his wisdom resonating in Michael's heart. The darkest hour is just before the dawn. In the weeks following the verdict, Michael continued to speak out, using his platform to advocate for systemic change. He worked closely with the Civil Rights Alliance to push for legislative reforms, including stricter accountability measures for corporations engaging in discriminatory practices. Darren, emboldened by the trial's outcome, joined a nonprofit organization focused on workplace equity, dedicating his life to ensuring others wouldn't face the injustices he had witnessed. Denise, now free from the constraints of her NDA, became a vocal advocate for labor rights, sharing her story with national audiences and inspiring others to speak up. At home, life began to settle into a new normal. Erica, once hesitant about the toll the fight was taking, became one of Michael's strongest allies. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Isaiah play in the yard, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "I never wanted you to go through all of this. But I'm so proud of you, Michael. You didn't just fight for yourself, you fought for all of us." Michael smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "It was never just about me," he said softly. "It was about making sure no one else has to go through what we did." Erica nodded, and for the first time in months, there was no fear in her eyes, only hope. As winter melted into spring, Michael returned to the supermarket, not as a customer, but as a guest speaker for one of their newly implemented diversity training sessions. Standing before a room of employees, he shared his story, not with anger, but with a spirit of reconciliation. "This isn't about pointing fingers," he told them. "It's about learning, growing, and making sure we do better together." The room was silent as his words sank in. When the session ended, several employees approached him to thank him, their gratitude genuine. On the anniversary of his arrest, Michael stood at the pulpit of his church, reflecting on the journey he had traveled. The sanctuary was packed, filled not just with his congregation, but with members of the community, local leaders, and activists who had supported him along the way. This past year has taught me that faith isn't about avoiding struggles, it's about finding strength in the midst of them, he said. It's about trusting that God can use even our darkest moments for his glory. As the congregation rose to their feet, Michael felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The fight hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. And though the road ahead was still long, he knew he was ready to walk it one step at a time. Months after the verdict, Michael's life had changed in ways he never imagined. The legal battle, once a source of immense stress and fear, had become a springboard for transformation not only for him, but for the many lives his case had touched. Yet, amidst all the change, Michael remained grounded in his faith, his family, and his community. One quiet evening, Michael sat on his porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. His Bible rested on his lap, open to the Psalms, a source of comfort during his most difficult days. Isaiah played in the yard, chasing fireflies, his laughter echoing through the air. Erica joined Michael with 2 mugs of tea, handing one to him before sitting down. "You ever think about how far you've come?" Erica asked, her voice gentle. "A year ago, we were just trying to get through Christmas, and now look at you. You've become a voice for so many people." Michael chuckled softly. "It still feels surreal sometimes, but I think that's how God works. He takes our pain and turns it into purpose." Erica nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "Do you ever wish you hadn't gone through it? That none of this had happened?" Michael considered her question carefully. "There were moments, plenty of them, when I wanted to give up, to turn back. But no, I don't wish it didn't happen. Because if it hadn't, I wouldn't have learned what I'm capable of. And we wouldn't have seen the change that's already starting to happen." Indeed, change was underway. The supermarket chain, now under new leadership, had overhauled its policies and established an independent oversight committee to address complaints of discrimination. The local police department, facing mounting public pressure, had introduced mandatory bias training and increased transparency in its arrest procedures. Michael, however, knew the fight for justice was far from over. He continued to work with the Civil Rights Alliance, speaking at schools, churches, and community events about the importance of standing up to injustice. One of his most memorable speeches took place at a youth conference in Atlanta. The audience, filled with young people of all backgrounds, listened intently as Michael shared his journey. "You have a choice," he told them. "When you face adversity, you can let it break you, or you can let it shape you. God has a purpose for each of us, even when it's hard to see. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right, even when it feels impossible." Because that's when the impossible becomes possible. The room erupted into applause, and Michael saw in their faces a reflection of the hope that had carried him through his darkest moments. At home, life took on a quieter rhythm. Michael returned to his job as a carpenter, finding solace in the work of building and creating. On weekends, he volunteered at his church, helping to lead a mentorship program for young men in the community. One Saturday, as he worked with a group of boys on a woodworking project, Isaiah tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Mike," Isaiah said, his eyes bright with curiosity, "do you think I can be brave like you one day?" Michael knelt down, smiling at his nephew. "You're already brave, Isaiah. You've got God in your heart, and that's all the courage you'll ever need." Isaiah grinned, and Michael felt a swell of pride. If nothing else, this fight had shown his nephew and countless others that they were capable of more than they ever imagined. As the anniversary of the trial approached, Michael received a letter from Denise Brown. She had started her own nonprofit dedicated to supporting workers who faced discrimination and wrongful termination. "Your courage inspired me," Denise wrote. "Because of you, I found my voice. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late to stand up for what's right." Michael folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer filled with similar notes and messages. Each one was a testament to the impact of his journey, a reminder that his pain had paved the way for healing and hope. On the anniversary itself, Michael attended a community gathering organized in his honor. The event, held at the local park, was filled with music, food, and testimonies from those who had been inspired by his story. Darren was there, standing proudly with his family, as were Angela and many of the people who had supported Michael throughout his fight. When it was Michael's turn to speak, He stood before the crowd, his heart full. "A year ago, I was arrested for doing nothing but Christmas shopping," he began. "That moment could have broken me. But instead, God used it to build something greater than I ever could have imagined." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "This fight wasn't just mine, it was ours. It was about standing together, about saying we won't let fear and hate define us. And it's not over. The work continues, but so does the hope. Because with God, all things are possible." The crowd erupted into applause, and Michael felt a deep sense of peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. As the evening wound down, Michael stood beneath the stars, reflecting on the path that had brought him here. He thought of his late father's words, which had guided him through his darkest days. "The darkest hour is just before the dawn." He smiled, whispering a quiet prayer of gratitude. The dawn had come, and with it the promise of a brighter future, not just for him, but for everyone willing to stand up for what was right. Call to action. Michael's story reminds us of the power of faith, resilience, and community. If this journey inspired you, please share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope and justice. And don't forget to check out our next video, where we explore how small acts of courage can create lasting change. Together, we can be the light in the darkness. Let's keep shining.